All right. As many of you know, I'm sure many of you guys are doing this right now. Working from home is a huge trend. So, today, three B2B software companies want to bring to you some tips that we've actually used internally across all of our teams for working from home. So, with that, I'll jump in. And while working from home is great, we at Namely, we really like to come out and meet everyone we possibly can. We have an event in New York City where we talk about HR redefined and how we're helping define that. And thought leaders in this space will define it as well. Adam Grant is going to be speaking, who has a couple fantastic books that are really popular. We will send this out, but maybe snap a screenshot if you're interested in jumping on that URL and learning more about our event in New York City. And next, Zoomtopia is happening this fall in San Jose, their conference. So check that out if you're on the West Coast and want to come say hi to the Zoom team. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Owl Labs.
Perfect, thank you. So for the folks joining us today and all our registrants, good news. You have automatically been entered to win a free meeting owl by my company, Owl Labs. Very, very exciting. I know a lot of the current Owl Labs customers on the call already are probably pretty excited about this, but in the event that the meeting owl is a new technology to you, what it is if you've ever joined a meeting and found it difficult to engage, maybe you couldn't hear, see, really made it hard to participate, the meeting owl hopes to fix that. It's a technology that goes in the center of your conference room table, and actually as someone begins speaking, will automatically focus on that person when they start talking. So really different experience and helps you feel like you're almost in the room with the team. So can't wait to hear who's gonna win that. So good luck.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And so today, I'll give you a quick rundown for what we plan to chat about today. You've already met Rebecca, but I'll give a shout out to the other two speakers from Zoom, and namely after this slide. Next, we'll check in on the current state of remote work, where it's at, how we've gotten to this point specifically. We'll move on to chat about why implementing a remote work policy is so important. It's almost like a necessary perk, you could say, in this day and age. And why you all registered was the top 10 tips to build a successful remote work program. A lot of us have experience working from home, managing remote teams. So we've learned a lot, and we're excited to share it with you today. And as I mentioned before, we'll move into a Q&A. So use that Q&A feature in Zoom. And lastly, we will distribute the SHRM code with the remaining time. So with that, I'd like to move on and introduce our speakers. First, from the Namely side, we've got Ashley Benias, lead talent acquisition partner here at Namely. Excited to have you, Ashley. Janelle Rainey, the head of product marketing at Zoom, the product we're using now and we all love. And lastly, Rebecca Corliss, the VP of marketing over at Owl Labs, who is bringing us the giveaway today. So with that, I will pass it over to Ashley.
Great. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So remote work really is no longer considered a perk. It's really becoming the new norm. So in today's workplace, it's a safe bet that you'll find employees working somewhere other than the company headquarters. Whether it's a satellite office or from home, the modern office isn't really an office at all anymore. Remote work has become the new normal. So whether you call it telecommuting or just working from home, a study actually conducted by SHRM showed that by 2020, nearly half of the workforce will be working remotely. That's huge. So now HR teams are tasked, now more than ever, with ensuring that they're able to continue to drive engagement, productivity, and culture amongst all employees, especially in this new era of remote work. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to ensure those things don't get lost.
Perfect. So from the Owl Labs side, we know these anecdotes about remote work, flexible work, distributed work, and we really wanted to dig into some research and understand how is remote work evolving and how is it impacting the workplace. And so last fall, we did a study called The State of Remote Work, talked to over 1,000 different respondents from US-based companies, and we want to understand how is remote work changing their day-to-day and how is it having an impact on their business. And the first stat we found really, really interesting is that today over half of full-time working employees in general are working remotely at least once per week. And so take a moment to reflect, is that more, is that less from your current organization? But it's quite interesting. And the reason why I wanted to point it out and what really makes it exceptional that we're all here today is this thought. And that is a question for you. And why is it in so many places, so many organizations, are our corporate and working policies so heavily weighted toward on-site employees if 1/5 of our working time is actually done out of the office? Think about it. Well, the good news is you're all here today, likely to learn how to evolve this, which is great because it's really going in an excellent and growing direction. And so with that, you might be thinking, well, I'm not sure remote work is for us. I really want to understand the benefits to the company. So I have two to share for you. And the first one on our next slide is the fact that 33% for distributed companies, fully distributed, meaning fully remote, there's no physical locations, believe it or not. Those companies actually take 33% less time to hire new employees. And you might say, okay, Rebecca, hold up. I can't move to a fully distributed workplace. That's not realistic. And I would agree with you. That would be quite drastic if that is not your norm. However, there is something really interesting to learn from this. And that is the fact that when a hiring manager, hiring team, whoever it may be, starts to think about recruiting outside of the commutable distance to your office, your hiring pool will grow. Makes a lot of sense. There's a lot more people outside of our own geographic bubbles. And so in the event you have the opportunity to hire for folks that are outside of your geographic area, that might help you find the right people faster. So that's one great point. And then a final one I really wanted to end on before we start diving into some of our tips is around remote work and retention. So obviously retaining employees is so essential. And one of the other things we found is that companies that have remote work actually get to experience 25% lower employee turnover, which is pretty phenomenal. And so then the question is, why is that the case? Well, the first one, it might be pretty obvious, might be your guess in this very moment, and that's the idea that often companies that have remote work most likely have strong work-life balance. You can work from anywhere. That flexibility and benefit to have. There's actually another reason for that as well. If you imagine the dynamic that needs to occur between a remote employee and his or her manager, wherever that manager be located, you really need to have a strong element of trust. You can't rely on some of the traditional methods of knowing if someone is working, being productive or not. You really need to trust that individual because you can't see them. And so that increase of trust actually increases employee happiness. There's actually a study by MIT that found that improvement in trust improves employee retention, happiness overall. So it makes sense that those things would go hand in hand.
Great. So why implement a remote work policy? First of all, employees are already taking advantage of this perk. We all know that employees are already working regularly from home, whether it's taking computers and phones home after work to finalize projects or answer emails, take calls later while away from the office. It's already happening. So if we're already working successfully in that manner, why not preference and drive it forward? Next, it gives companies a competitive advantage in terms of recruiting, as Rebecca just mentioned. So in the era of low unemployment and a so-called war on talent, a competitive recruiting advantage is huge. A study conducted by SoftChoice actually showed that 74% of workers would quit their current jobs to work for an organization offering remote work opportunities. Also, it meets the demands of a younger workforce. So 68% of job seekers who are millennials said that an option to work remotely would greatly increase their interest in specific employers, according to a survey done by After College. And then it also boosts morale. So employee retention is a key reason why companies are jumping on board with remote work. A study conducted by PGI showed that 80% of workers had higher morale when working from home, while 69% reported lower absenteeism. So that's huge. Lastly, remote work really is the future of work.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Now that we know the benefits of working remotely, how do you actually make it work? And part of this is, how are you going to structure your team? So really your first step is building that plan to make it, what is your remote environment going to look like? So partially remote workers are going to be addressed a little bit differently than full-time remote workers, or employees who may be transferring from headquarter locations. So how you approach these may be vastly different. And Alex, why don't we go ahead and launch a poll here, just so we get a sense from the audience of what does their remote structure look like today. So for the flexible work benefits, are you looking to implement a flexible benefit that would allow people to work from home when they need to? Or are you bringing on partial remote employees where they're going to work from home a set number of days a week? Or maybe you're hiring full-time remote employees. Or maybe you are transitioning those headquarter employees to remote workers, and you're going to need to consider, how do I approach that, and how do I make this experience really great for everybody? So everybody just put those fingers on there and give us a quick poll check here. I'll give you a few more minutes or seconds. No, we won't. We're going to launch the results. There we go. So great. It looks like 37% are looking at the flexible arrangement, and 36% are looking for some full-time remote workers. So this is a nice mix here. And there's 20% who are still considering remote work as an option. So this is a great webinar for you. Be sure to fill out some questions, and hopefully you'll get all your information that you need with this.
Great, awesome. So we'll also want to look at rethinking the hiring strategy, right? So first, we should always be hiring for the right qualities, no matter what. But it could be beneficial to look at adding to the culture as kind of a term versus a notion of fitting into a culture, or the ever popular cultural fit term. That term is very subjective. So something to look out there. Also, it's very important to create an exceptional candidate experience, of course. So during your interview sessions, you should always strive to create a welcoming atmosphere. This way, you're making sure that the candidates are relaxed enough to show you their best self, making it easier to spot real talent. By creating that relaxed atmosphere, candidates will hopefully be more likely to open up and respond to your questions honestly. Which brings us to asking the right questions, especially when looking for individuals who would work well remotely. So some examples for you could be, could you tell me about a time that you made an important decision without the help of a supervisor or a boss? Or tell me about a time when you had to rely on written communication to get your ideas across to the team. And then finally, what does your ideal work environment look like? These questions can really help gauge their ability to thrive in a remote environment. And then something else to look at is giving candidates a case study. This can really help assess predetermined competencies in real on-the-job type situations. And then I'm going to hand it over to Janelle, who's going to give us a couple examples of some things they do over at Owl Labs. Or I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm going to hand it over to Janelle, who's going to discuss leveraging video technology in terms of hiring strategy.
Great, thanks, Ashley. We'll give the next one to Rebecca from Owl Labs. So yes, at Zoom, of course, we do use the video conferencing a lot during the hiring strategies and interviewing. You know, it's great to have somebody come in person and to meet the team, but a lot of times that's just not feasible. One, you may not be sure if you want to invest in the expense of bringing them here, maybe putting them in a hotel. It's just the time efficiency of, like, we move really fast. We're hiring a ton of people all the time. And to just be able to jump on and have the video meeting, you're immediately getting that eye contact, the visual cues. Are they understanding? You're seeing their engagement and their interest in the role. And they're getting a feeling for your culture as well when you're doing this. So it's a great opportunity to just leverage the video technology when you can't bring somebody in person. And you're also seeing, well, how will they react when they're working from home with that? And Rebecca, do you want to talk about communication skills?
Absolutely.
would
So
like
you
that.
can imagine when you're hiring a group of folks that are going to be distributed, whether it be they're working from home, different locations, et cetera, you can't necessarily rely on those off the cuff hallway water cooler type of conversations. You need to make sure instead that you have timed communication and that things are really organized. So anyway, the long and the short of it is really hiring and interviewing for communication ability is important because you need to make sure these are the individuals that are comfortable and prepared to be proactive in terms of communicating with their team, in terms of updating and how things are going on, because you can't necessarily rely on those off the cuff conversations in that case. You need to make sure people understand that.
Great. So clearly, you've done the interviewing. You're looking at that, but you also need to train your managers on how are they going to manage people who are remote. I've done this for a long time, working remotely and managing my team. So I have a few tips here. First, it's teaching those managers to be proactive in their communications. So they want to make sure they're being inclusive. They're updating the remote employees, especially if there's hallway conversations or decisions made in meetings where they're not there. It's also really important that you're setting the communications clearly. This really becomes like a results-oriented work environment where you're really focused on the goals and what they're delivering rather than am I seeing them there in the seat. So it's really important that you're teaching those managers to be proactive. You also want to help the leaders translate the company culture. So some of the things we do at Zoom, one is we have our all hands on Zoom. You can have up to 500 people all on video. So they're seeing their leaders, they're seeing the interactions with that. We also have things like coffee breaks, or we call it roulette, where people will join, and we do this with different time zones, so in the morning and at night. So people can join, then we put them in breakout rooms and they can chat with like 10 different people. So even though they're remote, they're meeting more people and getting involved with that. You want to also empower your managers to bring people together. And this can be virtually. There are companies that will have pizza together for lunch, or and maybe they send it to the employee's house too. If they're bringing pizza into the office, send it to their house as well. And just let them talk. So virtually is great. It's also great if you have a little bit of budget, if you can bring them in and meet in person. And this may be once a year if your team is widely dispersed, or it could be, hey, once a month, let's all meet for coffee or lunch together. It's just great to have that personal interaction and connection with the people. And what's really important too is eliminating the unconscious bias. And this is a tough one, because if you're used to looking at visual cues for how hard somebody's working, or are they there and how committed are they, you're not necessarily going to see that in somebody who's remote. So it's really important that you're looking at what are they getting done rather than are they present and in the seat at the time. And you'll also get a sense of that because of how often they're available online and are they responsive. So it's really important that you're valuing those people who work remotely equally as the people who are in the office.
Perfect. So now that we've trained our managers, they understand how they can support their team, whether they be remote, on-site, et cetera. Now we need to set some guidelines in terms of how the team is going to work together, because today you can't necessarily rely on people's in-office times to understand when work is being done, when communication happens, et cetera. You need to set some really concrete guidelines to make sure everyone's on the same page. And so a few things that you should do with your team: clear things, easy things like when is each person's working time. That might be dictated by their personal preference or their time zones. When are the dedicated office hours, if you will, that each person will be doing? When will your meetings be? How can they cross the different time zones? And when will you have those one-on-one conversations to really hit back on that point? You can't necessarily rely on those off-the-cuff conversations, those water cooler conversations. You really need to make sure you have scheduled time to talk about what you need to talk about. So this really structured ability to work together will help make it concrete. So now, what are some of the benefits of this? Well, two separate sides of the spectrum. So for the folks where remote work may be a very new aspect of their environment, having this structure and being really clear will help make everyone understand that the fact you're not in the office doesn't mean you now have the ability to do some errands while on company hours. Pretty obvious, but it's nice to have that be crystal clear. But then there's something on the other side, and it's you are at your home, perhaps if you work from a home office. At what point in time are you working, and when should you turn off? Because believe it or not, some remote workers actually have a really difficult time finding balance, because it's real easy to just keep on trucking through dinner time. There's no change in location to dictate when work begins or stops. So again, having that concrete structure of work hours, et cetera, really helps alleviate that.
Great. So now let's talk about making that communication universal. So starting with company-wide updates, make sure that all employees have access to these with the proper technology. You want to ensure that remote workers don't have a feeling that they're looking from the outside in. Also, continue to make sure that the managerial check-ins are frequent. So despite working remotely, employees should still have them with managers. Weekly is definitely recommended, and via video. Regardless of the meeting purpose, there should be an expectation set that if you expect for an individual to be remote for every meeting, a video conferencing link should be included in every calendar invite. Next, ensure not to overlook remote employees for promotions and raises. Super important. A study conducted by MIT showed that simply being in the office could have a correlation to performance. However, in another study conducted by Stanford, they showed that remote employees actually were outperforming their counterparts in headquarter locations, which was cool. Finally, it's just really important to make sure that everybody knows that working from home is supported, and it can be done through all of your daily activities as mentioned in these examples.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit more about communication. And this is where I'm going to get just a little bit controversial with you all, so bear with me. And I want to say very clearly that if your company, unfortunately, still exclusively uses audio as the main way to communicate in your team meetings, you're putting your remote team members at an extreme disadvantage. And it makes a lot of sense. Why should the folks in the room have such great visual context, understand what's going on, see what's happening, et cetera? And why can your remote team members not get that information? And so let's dig into some data. There's a researcher named Albert Moravian, and he looked at the power of verbal versus nonverbal communication. And one of the things that he found is that 55% of communication is actually made up of facial expressions and body language. It makes a lot of sense. It's that type of detail that really brings a lot of nuance to your conversation. And so if the folks in the room are getting that and the folks out of the room aren't, that's really a shame. And that's making it so they can't have as much of an impact that they should during those conversations. And so really think about how can you collect as much visual information as possible to make sure those people feel extremely included in those conversations so they can have a great conversation as well.
Rebecca, 100%. It's a little controversial, but I completely agree, especially having worked remotely for a long time, having that video component and being able to be part of that conversation is just so critical, and have those nonverbal cues. So what we're seeing, this is research from Forbes that we conducted, is that people who do take advantage of the video, we see this a lot more in high growth companies or modern companies, 92% say it has a positive impact on performance. That's for all employees. It's fast becoming the norm for internal teams with 80%. And 84% is saying it's even becoming the norm for external communications as well. And I think that really gets back to, Rebecca, what you were saying of just how important it is to have those visual cues. And it really does build the trust as well. So next, if we look at the slide that's going to tell us about where should you invest in technology and what do you need there? So it can really be the glue that brings your remote employees together. And this is beyond just the video component. You want to look at your chat tools. So Zoom has a chat tool here, as does Slack, Skype for Teams, whatever you may be using for that. You also, of course, your video conferencing software and hardware. So you want to make sure that they're empowered with the right tools, and maybe a headset, and maybe the Owl Lab component that they have. It may be something directly from, do they have a great speaker and camera on their computer? Can they access this from anywhere? You want to really just make sure that they have that capability. So Gagom did a study that showed that 87% of remote employees felt more connected to their company when they were meeting through video conferencing. So I'm just Can't stress this enough of how important that is to really level the playing field for that. Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about the news feed?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks, Janelle. So part of the Namely product actually includes a company news feed, which is very social in nature. It gives the ability to share business updates from leadership or different team leads, celebrate birthdays and anniversaries, or simply just recognize employees. You can also like and comment on the posts, very much like a Facebook, which can really help drive employee engagement. So pretty cool.
That is very cool. For document storage, you also want to look at things that are basically cloud-based. So Google Docs, Confluence, Dropbox, maybe on your intranet, but make it easy for people to find documents and collaborate on things together. Also project management tools, these help a lot. So it could be something like Trello, Basecamp, Jira, or maybe it's a program for weekly updates or pulse checks. One of my personal favorites is 15.5. And just ways that people can communicate and keep up to date with one another.
Wonderful. So now let's talk about establishing a cultural consistency with all of this. So out of sight, out of mind should never be the mindset when it comes to remote workers. Always include these employees in team building activities and all hands meetings via video, as we've been discussing. It's really the job of the HR team to establish and maintain these conventions that make even the remote teams feel like they're part of the entire organization. Beyond the space itself, as mentioned previously, recruiting efforts should focus heavily on a cultural addition versus fit, since it is just so subjective. Next, you should try to replicate headquartered hosted events in satellite offices. So setting up team building activities utilizing these video conferencing tools to ensure that these workers are feeling included in the day-to-day company culture is really important. And don't only include the remote workers in the business conversations and the must-haves, but also in the fun kind of day-to-day aspects of the job as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca with Owl Labs, who's going to share a couple examples of some things that they do at Owl Labs in this area.
Yeah, two things that we like to do at Owl Labs, and some of the things that we've seen Owl Labs customers do, I want to share as ideas. And the first one is really fun. Actually, one of my favorite things as an Owl Labs employee myself, we get together every Friday, the entire team, no matter where they are. For the East Coast, it's for lunch. For the West Coast, it's breakfast. And what we do is we do updates in terms of what's happening, what are some of the wins that we've had. It's very, very casual. And it's also a time in which we can share and really brainstorm with each other. It's supposed to replicate that kind of off the cuff hangout, and it's really, really impactful. So that's something that we do, and I think some of our customers do as well. And another one I'm taking from a great customer, and it's around swag. So we all love swag. We love our T-shirts. We love our stickers, etc. And what this customer does is every time there's some new swag, whatever it may be, he makes sure he mails it. He physically does this himself. He makes sure he mails it to all of his remote teammates because he wants to make sure that they are also getting that joy of something new, a bit of company pride. And I actually find that to be really incredible.
Such great ideas. Thanks so much. So then also another idea is to implement a buddy system. So that way your remote workers will have an employee from headquarters on hand as kind of an all-the-time resource. Really just recognition goes a long way. Don't forget to appreciate the remote employees as well.
Excellent. And so now we need to talk about how we can measure the impact of our distributed team. And impact is a very, very important word because I'm saying impact and not productivity. Because as we know, we all have different work styles, timing of work, etc. And so what you should do as a leader in this case is think about, what do you need to know in order to understand that someone is having an impact? Is it a key KPI for the company? Is it a milestone? Is it some goal that he or she has? And how can you understand how they're tracking toward that goal? Because at the end of the day, it's really about the impact we're having on the business, not necessarily the hours spent or the exertion that's given in any given time. And the other benefit, I talked really early about the power of trust. When you start having a dynamic between employee and manager that's really focused on impact, and that you trust him or her to do it in the way that makes sense for that person and to have the outcome that you want, that becomes a really nice dynamic and helps make sure that everyone knows that even though they're not in the office, they're trusted to do good work, and you know that they care about the impact at hand.
Great. So now, of course, we must address compliance. Very important. As with most HR topics, compliance is a top concern in establishing a remote work policy. So some things for you to keep in mind. Payroll requirements. So out-of-state taxation and international payroll processing, for example. Remember to have these things in line and buttoned up prior to hiring any remote employee. Also, security concerns. We all know that in this day and age, data breaches and hacking, they're a real concern. So, have that buttoned up. Also, what happens if a remote worker's computer is stolen or breaks? And how will IT communicate with remote workers? What if, they're having trouble with the system? Come up with a game plan ahead of time. And then finally, FLSA. So responding to emails, answering phone calls, responding to Slack after hours is still considered work. So managers should be mindful of those communication habits, as we've talked about. Despite busy schedules, messaging a non-exempt remote worker at odd hours only invites later compliance issues, regardless of whether he or she expects that immediate response or not. So definitely critical topics to ensure proper compliance on prior to having remote work.
Great. So we always want to be thinking towards the future. And I'm so excited that we have such an amazing attendance here today. It's clearly a top of mind and topic that everybody's interested in. But let's actually launch one more poll and be sure to put in your questions in Q&A. We want to know, based on today's presentation, what are you most excited about in regards to remote work? Is it creating a solid remote work structure, your hiring strategy, maybe it's managerial training or communication skills, technology resources, remote culture, tracking the impact, or addressing compliance? And Alex, I know we've actually have quite a few questions coming in. Do you want to go ahead and throw one at us while everybody's filling out this poll?
Yeah, let me take a look. One question we have for Janelle. Janelle, you mentioned that Zoom uses roulette meetings to foster community between remote colleagues. How do you encourage folks to set aside time for this sort of socialization when the benefits might be less tangible than if they spent the time working through their to-do lists?
Yeah, great question. And maybe it's our culture, but one, it's a lot of fun. I think when you want to be included, because people are talking about like what happened later, we do have incentives in there as well. Like if somebody has the most creative answer to a question, they'll win a gift card for like Starbucks or something. So we do have ways to just kind of make it fun and engaging. I think another thing is if you have your executives involved in this, it's just great visibility for everybody to be involved. So one, if you can get the executive sponsorship, make sure that they're bought in on, hey, this really drives the culture of the company, and maybe just give a few incentives. But ultimately, people just want to do it. It's kind of the way that that's happened at our company. All right, thanks, Alex. And everybody, please get your questions in. And here are our poll results. By far, it's creating the remote work structure with 44%. The culture is also very important with 42% of our respondents. Communication skills and tracking impact. These are all great. I hope you guys have learned a lot here. We are here to do some Q&A as well. But first, I'm going to let Rebecca wrap us up here with what are the top 10 tips that make working from home actually work.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Here is a recap of every tip that we've shared with you so far before we jump into Q&A. So number one, consider the structure of your remote work plan. Is this a structure to help a fully distributed organization, one where remote work is a perk and a benefit, or one where you're looking to encourage work-life balance? So consider that. Number two, really rethink your hiring strategy. Does your hiring strategy today only work when it's on site? And if so, how can you improve it in order to include remote interviews as well, through video tools, through thinking of those key questions that help you understand if someone's going to be a successful remote worker or not. Number three, make sure you train your managers. Management is obviously so important to make sure all employees have that wonderful opportunity to have an impact, and that you remove that unconscious bias from that management style if it exists. Number four, think about what is going to be the structure of your team's day. What are work hours? What are non-hours? What are your times for group communication, one-on-one communications? Really set those standards for availability and communication to make sure you work well together. And number five, then no matter how you're communicating, make sure it's universal. So no matter where you're located, you have equal opportunity to understand what's going on and have an impact. Number six, think about what technology and video, as example, video technology, you may use in order to make sure your team works really well together. We went through a lot of different great applications, from project management to culture to communication, etc. Invest in those technologies and make sure they can be used no matter where you're located. Number seven, think about what your cultural consistency will be. I gave my fun example of mailing swag, for example, to each of your employees, no matter where they are. It's important that each employee has a sense of the culture, understands it, and that the way that you communicate and express that culture can be over geographic barriers, no matter if you're in the office or not. And then eight, really make sure that you're tracking and measuring impact versus productivity. And this one's going to be hard for a lot of people to think of, because you may be used to measuring hours worked as a main way. But by backing off of that and really thinking of how you can set clear goals and understand if someone's tracking toward those or not, that's going to be a great way to make sure you work well together. Number nine, thinking about how you can address compliance, understanding that when you have people in different countries, different hours, different employment statuses, etc., it brings in a whole new level of complication. And so really working with your HR team and getting the skills in order to do that well will be very important. And then finally, number 10, we all know remote work is growing day after day. Think toward the future. Good for you for being here today to strengthen and grow your own skills, your own knowledge of remote work and working from home. That's the first step, so kudos. And now from here, it's going to be implementing the plan that you create from the takeaways that you have. Hopefully there's a few takeaways you have so far that you'll want to test and implement, and then think about how you can measure that impact and really evolve from there. So good for you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Some really fantastic stuff. Even I learned some stuff as we at Namely build out a work from home policy. So great tips. Got a lot of Q&A still rolling in. So for anybody who's on the webinar, continue to ask those and I'll flag them to answer live. I'm going to start with a couple that actually came in before the webinar, and I think we could dive into a little deeper. The first question I've actually got for Rebecca is a little long-winded, so I'll try to chat slowly. But upper management within my company has viewed working from home negatively in the past, as employees have traditionally taken advantage of this perk and become less productive. Any advice on ensuring that employees are remaining productive throughout the day without feeling the need to micromanage all employees? I think a lot of you, all three of you, could probably chime in here.
Wow, that is tricky. That's a wonderful question, and very, very difficult and not unusual, unfortunately. And so a few things here. I'm going to first say the first thing that you might not like to hear, but I think it's important that we address this. There might be an employee engagement challenge in general in that case, where if folks are seeing the time from home as a way to get away from work versus dive in and really have an impact, maybe there's misalignment on what the goals are, what you need to achieve as an organization, as the impact that that person's expected to achieve. So that could be the case. And two, I would say likely there needs to be a strengthening of communication between manager and employee, and really focus on that trust. Whether it be saying, okay, how will you let me know that you're having an impact? How will you communicate to us when you have hit this milestone, and putting the onus on that employee so they know that with this new benefit, they are being trusted and they're being expected to rise to the occasion. So that might be another suggestion. Anything else from the other folks, my other fantastic panelists?
Yeah, I agree, Rebecca. I think it's about building that trust. And a lot of that, if you want to work remotely, that illness is going to come on you a little bit. You're going to have to show that you really are trustworthy and that you are getting things done. So we always talk about managing up, but you have to do it to an extra level. Make sure you're visible, make sure people know what you're working on, what you're doing, and build that trust so that you do get the perk of being able to work from home when you want to. And that's really only way you're going to convince somebody who's not really bought into it.
Great.
Awesome. All right. So a lot of questions actually. I think it's kind of a layup for all three of our organizations coming in around technology. So I want to ask a broad one to all three of the panelists. The presentation mentioned an array of technology resources. Are there any apps or websites that you couldn't imagine working remotely without?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. Number one is Zoom. I'll do my own self plug here, but we do use it a lot for the chat. On that, you can chat individually, or you can set up groups where you're chatting with teams of people. You can share files, and then you can quickly escalate that into a video meeting, or of course scheduling your meetings. We also use Google, the Google Suite, so easy collaboration on those docs or slides or sheets that we're working on. And then I think I did mention, one of my favorites just for the team, and kind of what are you working on, what's the status, and also how are you feeling, because how are you feeling is actually really important. It's a 15-5, and it's just a quick survey. It should take them like less than 15 minutes to fill out, and as a manager about 5 minutes to review each week. It's just a nice way to touch base. Rebecca, Ashley, do you guys have favorite tools?
Well, if Janelle got to say Zoom, I get to say So, no,
Absolutely.
I'm teasing. Well, we do, quite obviously, we do use our meeting owl for our own team meetings, et cetera. It's actually wonderful because we have a very large remote workforce ourselves at Owl Lab, so it's great to get that feedback and suggestions in order to grow our own product. So that's wonderful. But either way, other tools that we use, we are very strong on Slack. Slack is our favorite chat tool. We actually are one of those environments where we use chat more than email. Email is more of a tool for external communication. And so what chat allows us to do through Slack is make it so you can have those off-the-cuff casual conversations no matter where you're located, which is really, really great for our team.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, so I am remote and my team is fully in New York. So we've got a time difference and everybody on the team is all sitting together in New York. And then, I'm by myself at home. And so we use Slack as well. And we have different team channels to where if you have a question or an idea or a thought, people put them in the Slack channel. And then that way for me, it's great because I can chime in and answer or, get ideas instead of everyone just chatting themselves, sitting next to each other. It definitely helps to make me feel included. So that's really helpful.
And Alex, I just want to wrap this up with one more thing of thinking about how this changes the office culture as well. Because if people are working some days remote and some days coming in, they may not even have a desk anymore. It may become more of a hotel type of office. And you see a lot of these companies moving into open office space. It really does save on real estate, which is great. But if you have that open office space, you frequently need more huddle rooms. And you want to make sure that those are all video enabled as well, so you can connect with any dispersed team members, remote offices, anywhere around the world. But making sure you have that capability. Think about the remote person, but also think about how does your office culture change as well to support that.
Great. And so I found it interesting. Ashley, I want to go back to you, and I think Janelle might have some feedback here as well. But Stephanie asked, we have one employee that works remotely and 4 in our office. I just the parallel with what you just described. And she says, I find it hard to always remember to communicate office conversations. Do you have any tips for helping keep that flow of information open?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it can be tough, especially if it's a new practice, and you're used to having, an entire team together in the office. I'd say it really just starts with kind of changing the culture of that and really encouraging the chat communication, as Rebecca noted. And namely as well, we do a lot on Slack versus email. So starting with that and really just trying to kind of change that culture there and just encouraging the communication via technology will really help. And as we mentioned, a ton over the webinar, it's really, really helpful to have those meetings via video, because then you're just really lost when you're just over the phone. So when you start having those video, meetings as a team, it really does remind the in-office workers that, oh yeah, we have Ashley off in Denver, remote, and it just starts clicking in people's heads. And it just really starts kind of taking off from there as sort of the new way of life.
Good stuff. Cool. So I think I probably have about a question for each of you left. I will start with Rebecca. I think this one pertains to some of the things you chatted about today. The question reads, my company does not currently have a remote work policy. How would you suggest convincing your manager and company to allow working from home?
Ooh, so I
Common
think, yeah, it's a tough one. First, I think we presented a handful of data here. Feel free to use the state of remote work if you like. There's also other great statistics out there. But I think starting with the benefits that it can have on the organization might be a great place to start, in regards to how it can impact retention, how it can impact hiring, how it can impact morale, etc. So as a contributor in that case, you're coming to the table showing that you want this to be a change that has an extremely positive impact on the entire organization, not just you. You're really thinking with that mindset. I think that's the first place to start. And then if it's possible as a step two, maybe the person you're talking to is engaged and ready for a conversation. Could you do a survey across your employee base and get a sense of what are some of the things that would be helpful to your organization, whether it be you want to start with work from home Wednesdays, just to give it a shot. Is that a good way to do a test for a little bit? Another great thing I've seen as a way to dip your toe in the water. My previous company, HubSpot, has done this, and I think it's a fantastic idea. They do a work from home week for an entire team. So everyone can experience this and understand what are some of the organizational changes that they might need to make in order to have remote work well in that case. Another great idea. So I would say go with the data, find ways to dip your toe in the water and do a few tests, and then finally evaluate the experience. How was it? Were you able to be just as successful and impactful while your group was distributed? And then think about how you might be able to roll out that test or even a full organizational change from there.
Awesome. So next question is actually for Janelle. Janelle, my company has historically struggled with time zone differences in regards to remote communication. Any suggestions on combating this issue?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. We have a global workforce here. So we do try to have, if we're having an all hands, we actually flip each week where if it's in the morning or if it's in the afternoon, so that our European or our Australian counterparts can participate live and do that. You can also record your meetings and allow them to see those later with transcripts, so they don't have to watch the whole meeting. They can just jump to the part they want to see. And then lastly, I would say there's some great plugins. Like in Google Calendar, you can literally have just a strip right next to you of what are those time zones. So when you are booking those meetings, you're aware of, oh, it's 2 a.m. there. This is not going to work. It's just a really nice little reminder for that. Rebecca, Ashley, anything you would add for time zone differences?
I have rotated team meetings before. At HubSpot, I'll use another example. We had teams in Singapore, Sydney, Germany, Boston, etc. And so there were no one single times for all of our global managers to get together. So we would say, we'll give you the best and the worst meeting times. And we would rotate what time that meeting would occur, because it was a monthly meeting. And there would always be at least one group where it would be midnight or something terrible like that. So in that case, what we would do is invite the teammates who would likely not be able to attend or wouldn't be realistic to submit questions or the agenda beforehand. We'd record everything, and then we would make sure there was follow-up after, and we would rotate who might be in that case every time.
Cool. That's good tips. I'm actually taking notes right now. I think we could use that on our demand team. So that's awesome. Last question I have, I know there's some people hanging tight for the SHRM code, but I think this one's really interesting, especially as workforces become more and more remote. I want to pass this one over to Ashley. Ashley, any advice for conducting onboarding for a remote employee?
Yeah, that's a great thought. It's a great question. So I think it's really important for remote workers to train at headquarters for a week or two, if possible. And I know that's a long time, but it's really important to kind of in the very beginning, set the proper expectations, spend as much time as possible in person, meeting the teammates and the business partners and the leaders that they will be interacting with on a day-to-day basis remotely. It really kind of starts the relationship off, from face to face, which just really kind of gets everyone on the right foot, in my opinion. I think it's also really important to make sure they have adequate time in that onboarding, face to face with IT and systems trainings, and to ensure that their setup is good and that they feel supported in terms of getting everything that they need to enable success. And then also, lastly, I would just say lots of check-ins in the beginning, really just to ensure that the learning is on track, systems are going well, address any hiccups, really stay in tune to how they're feeling and how they're doing, especially if someone is coming from being used to working in an office environment to then going strictly remote. It definitely can be an adjustment, and you do at times lose that, actual face-to-face day-to-day interaction. So really just making sure to check in with the transition, I think is really important.
Fantastic. Some really good stuff. We had so many questions coming in that I think we're going to put together a follow-up blog post. So if your question didn't get answered, no worries. You should expect that in your inbox with the recording and the slides. So with that, I think it's relevant for us to, I know we chatted about our organizations prior, but just give a quick rundown. For those of you not familiar with Namely is all-in-one HR, payroll, and benefits. It's especially important if you've got a remote workforce, because we'll take care of compliance across all those things, which can be hairy cross-state. And I know this isn't up there, but if you're interested in seeing a demo of Namely, just shoot a note to hello@namely.com with the subject line working from home. And if you follow through with the demo, we'll send you a $25 gift card. So if you're interested at all, highly recommend doing that and taking a look. And next, I'll pass it over to Janelle and let her give you a rundown of Zoom.
Yeah, so when you're using Zoom, thank you. So it's really just this easy, reliable cloud platform for video and audio conferencing. We also have chat and webinars that scale up to 10,000 people. It works across desktop, mobile, conference room systems. It's used by 40% of the Fortune 50 and 90% of the top US universities. It's really kind of this modern communications platform. You can get your free account at zoom.us or just fill out a form and we can give you a demo as well.
Perfect. Am I up?
You are up, Rebecca. Let's hear all about Owl Labs.
Awesome. So Rebecca with Owl Labs. Owl Labs is thrilled to be part of this. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're doing a raffle for our product, the Meeting Owl. The Meeting Owl is a 360-degree all-in-one camera and audio system that goes in the center of your table, and it's super cool. It uses audio and visual cues to automatically highlight different people as they speak. So super, super fun. Our DNA is in robotics, so it's very, very fun to have a product like this. And so you can imagine the result is by being able to see everyone's face so clearly, you almost feel as close as possible as being in the room with the team that you're meeting with. And yes, if there are any questions, we work nice and seamlessly with Zoom. I know there's a bunch of Zoom fans here as well, which is great. So check us out, owllabs.com.